welcome once again to the Radical Imagination, Real Talk in the Hamptons. And we have an extra special treat today. I've invited a longtime friend and colleague, comrade, Maestro Gregory singer, who's a world-class violinist, composer, conductor of the Manhattan Symphony, and we drove out from the city this morning. We're going to check out the Southampton Cultural Center, where you will be playing Monday, May 26th at 2 p.m.
Right.
And it says here, the title is Confessions of a Conductor. No, well, that wasn't the question mark. Confessions of a Conductor, Maestro Gregory singer minus his orchestra, a one-act skit with his world premiere original music. His Bach is Against the Wall. Whoa. Come join the often too spontaneous fun. So, Gregory, thank you so very, very much for being here. In East Hampton, from the city, you are a country guy too. You've been around the world, and you are now going to be here and present your music, your original music, and all kinds of other things that are percolating in your head in Southampton on May 26th.
That's right, Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
Right. So
Yes,
throw
and-
something in there for that, musically perhaps.
And why would, and what do you mean by that?
Well, Memorial Day, if I'm not mistaken, is the memory of those who have lost their lives protecting our country, yes?
Mm-hmm.
But so we sometimes say Memorial Day without even thinking further what it really does mean. And I wouldn't perhaps go overboard and make it a flag waving ceremony that's sort of scary or too fascistic like, but an American flag might appear, although I'm not bringing one. But I don't know. I was thinking, I mean, one would normally in the old days would have a marching band or play at least God Bless America or America the Beautiful, but I'm not planning on doing that.
You're not?
No,
Okay.
I'm not.
But it does obviously mean something to you to be able to present your music, your original music, music that you've played around the world on this date.
Well, that's true.
That's interesting.
It's a good point. And I didn't even think about the potential, profound magnitude of that. But I've been around the world a bit. My father came from a foreign country. My wife came from a foreign country. So in a way, the idea...
Did most Americans?
As almost all
Americans,
Americans that are certainly of a European background or other countries that were not indigenous to this country.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's true that suddenly on this Memorial Day to be in the Hamptons is so wonderful in Southampton and to share a variety of different cultural music, primarily written by me and maybe exclusively written by me. But I have different influences in my music. So in many ways, and the more I think about it this week, I'll be formulating how am I going to entertain this
Right.
special audience also. It's going to be spontaneous, so I'll be giving it some thought.
Because your audience will be also from the city, from out here, locals, international. But let me just go back to that Memorial Day. I'm not going to make
No,
too much of this
no, it's okay.
politically when you say people have lost their lives.
Yes.
Yes, Americans, but all around the world.
It's true. I mean, it raises a subject of your homeland, your country and your patriotism. And I was actually confused even Memorial Day, what is the memorial for? And we have so many special occasions, including for other disasters, natural disasters and 9/11, et cetera, that I'm thinking, yes, this was when I was a kid, the traditional way of giving
Right.
thanks for those who have given their
And
lives.
you played for these natural
Yes,
disasters
yes,
too.
well, all kinds of,
benefits, so on.
patriotic songs, etc. But on that particular Monday, I'm playing primarily my own music that I wrote on the violin, and I think I'm going to have a few surprise guests musically join my music, and we'll show a little bit the history of a composer or conductor or violinist, a little bit what they go through. So I'm going to try to put together a little skit that portrays a little bit that evolution. That brings me, in a sense, to your show. And in other words, what makes a career for a musician?
And exactly. And also, though, you're talking about, obviously, music, which is a universal language. So yes, we feel for our own people, our own country, but you are going to be playing music that goes beyond national boundaries in the sense.
Well, that's a good
That's what I'm
point.
getting
You know, it's something else that you've mentioned, which is very astute. Instinctively, it's true. We're talking also about the next generation, a little bit of education. So what either helps me or confuses me or hinders me is the fact that there's actually a few of these themes running simultaneously. So the idea of teaching younger people perhaps the difference between a violin and a fiddle or a viola.
Right.
And 'cause you were asking me that before when you spoke to me earlier. And you know, the idea of sharing some music and also sharing with the audience a live composer, someone who's writing music
Right.
today, and that's me.
I'm gonna hear. So to just go back for a second.
Yeah.
I would just say, well, the audience is saying, okay, so what's the difference between a fiddle and a viola and a violin?
yeah.
What's the big deal? Why make
Well, no, it's
this an
interesting.
issue? What
Well, first
what is
of all,
important about making that
in that
distinction?
question, the difference between a viola and a violin, they both start with the letter V, and they're similar sounding, short words, violin, viola. The root is probably from the same source, but the viola is the one which is the larger one,
Right.
and it has a deeper tone. Now, the cello is even larger and it has a lower and deeper tone, and the string bass is even larger and has obviously a larger and bigger and deeper tone.
Right.
So in this case, the violin is a little bit squeakier, a little bit smaller, soprano almost, and the viola is a richer tone. And I have two here today. I can
Huh.
show you at some point.
Yeah, please do. But so help me and the audience understand. So are you saying that the instrument itself helps channel the sort of music that's
Yes,
produced?
yes.
And
In
explain a
fact,
little
it's a
about that.
very good question. In fact, the personality of the music that's written for these instruments has evolved over the years. So the viola, being a lower instrument, is not, in a sense, the virtuoso kind of sound it carries for large concert halls and down the street, so to speak. A lot of the street violinists playing on the street would even tune their violins a little higher so that the sound really carries, like a trumpet, which would carry further. But the viola, being a little more mellow, was playing a lot more harmonically a supportive role. So the composers over the years, like Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and other ones, Brahms and Mahler, didn't put the virtuoso stuff with the viola section or solo
Virtuoso is
violas.
more, it's solo, right?
Yeah,
So it's more
the violins were
quartets,
higher and more virtuoso and noisier and faster.
flashier.
Yeah, flashier. And there were great, like Paganini and other great violinists.
Right.
But the violas are a little more mellow and playing more harmony. But there are some great musicians, of course, and great violists in the world that are championing the viola repertoire. And
Show our audience the viola. Yeah.
Okay,
You
well,
want to start
so
with the viola?
here's an instrument. I would ask the audience, would you guess it's a violin or a viola?
Oh,
And
okay.
it looks the same as
gave it
in this
away,
case, I
right?
gave it away, but it looks like a violin, but it is a viola. Now you can see that easier if I put a violin next to it. So you'll see the violin is much smaller. Now, what I feel happy about, which is so funny today on this wonderful show, is that so many people have asked me over the years on a subway or a bus, wherever I happen to be, what's the difference? Or are you carrying a violin or is that a viola? And many times when I carry the viola, they'll say, is that a violin in the case? And I have to explain to them. So here's like the first time in my many decades that I'm actually on wonderful TV show showing the people that this, you saw a violin today and you saw a viola next to it. And if Jim would like, I'll play a couple notes just to quickly
Please,
show you the
yeah,
difference. Now,
the
I will play
tone
you,
and-
yeah, I'll play you the violin first, and the high string is this string, the E. That's our highest open string on the violin. So we have G, D, A, E. And we teach the children when we learn, good dogs always eat. G, D, A, E. So the top note is E, and then we go higher. So our lowest note is G. Then we can go very high. Right now, we go back to the viola, which is larger, and the top note is lower. It's this note, not the E, but the A. And it goes down, and then the C is low.
So the A
lowest
is
note.
lower than the E?
It is. This A on the violin is the second note, but the first note is E. On the viola, our first note is A, and the lower note becomes right away
Yeah,
a
much
D
more
and a
subdued
G and
sound.
and a low C. So the low note on the violin is this. That's the lowest note on the violin is G, which is this note on the viola, but we can go on the viola lower. So now the viola has also a little bit larger, a larger bow, a little heavier bow. Very low. Nope, there you have it. You have low viola and higher violin, all the way up high and squeaky. And then you have cellos and basses,
Right.
which go even grander. But I cannot play. Most players don't play such.
Theoretically, you could play the same piece on both instruments.
Yes, and you
But-
might transpose it, or you might
Transpose
alter
it.
the overall key of it. But I can play certain notes like the same. I'll show you real quick. If I play, for instance, oops, I should change hats for that.
Oh,
That's
you-
another question, though, right? What's between a fiddle and a violin? We'll get to
We
that.
didn't get to the fiddle
Okay,
yet.
so here.
All right, yeah.
Now, if I can play that on the viola,
Wow.
it would be the same notes, but a little bit richer sounding.
When did, okay, viola came first, or were they
Well, that's
constructed in the
it's a good
same
question.
time? And when was this period in history?
Well, probably late 16th, 17th centuries. A lot of music was played primarily in churches, and there were these big viols, large violas and large cellos, basses that were playing long notes and very mellow religious style music. And later we had some virtuosos came along, maybe the early 19th century, late 18th century. You have people eventually coming in like Paganini and Franz Liszt and virtuosos that were now playing music in a sense outside of the church.
So would it be fair to say that this was more of the romantic?
Yes, in fact, there was the Romantic period, and they began selling tickets to concerts. So, in other words, the virtuosity of the violin came
For the
into
people,
fashion.
for the masses.
Yeah, for the
rather than
masses, for
just-
the people.
And
so-
this was more to glorify God in a sense.
Originally, yes.
Or try to instill a sense of worship or
That's correct.
holiness or what.
Now, when you have, let's say, the Irish playing some fiddle music like.
Okay, now
like-
you said fiddle now. You wanna-
Uh-oh, well, that's a good question. So what's your question about fiddle?
Well, gosh, now you're introducing the fiddle. Oh,
Uh-huh,
no,
that's
okay.
correct.
That's right now.
And what did I do? Did I change strings or change instruments? Is there a third instrument? That's
I only see two here.
exactly. So
So when does, now you brought the violin, when does the violin become the fiddle? Or can a viola also become a fiddle?
the $1,000,000 question.
Oh,
I will show you a quick transition
I
into
see.
that. Thank
This
you.
is the good guy and the bad.
Well,
no,
it
this
could
is
be.
the good guy.
Well, it could
okay.
be.
Well, all right.
Well, it's a white hat. We'll
It's a way,
associate that with.
it's cowboy
Whatever.
stuff.
But I will now, right in front of your very eyes on this incredibly special show, I will now convert this violin into a fiddle. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so that was fiddle music, and now I will now convert it back to a violin.
Wow.
Right?
So it's a different
So-
mood. It's a sense of, is the word color?
Color, yeah.
What is that?
It's a different
mean?
mood, different color, and the
Different
point
color.
that you're mentioning is that I didn't change strings or anything. Now, on a classical music guitar, you can play flamenco music, or you could electrify it. Well, that's a little bit of a different instrument, but it's the same notation. And you can play something like Jimi Hendrix if you're that talented, or you would play something like Segovia or something very classically modern acoustic guitar. Same with the violin. We can electrify the violin, or we can play bluegrass music, country western music, or we can play Mozart or Beethoven. And with actually, in this case, no change to the violin whatsoever. So after a long-worded explanation, in short, the violin and the fiddle are pretty much one and the same instrument.
But not the viola and the
No,
fiddle.
but the viola is larger physically, and the tonality is different, and you're right.
Well,
But see, this is the aspect you mentioned about, in a sense, a little bit of education, the word education, and becoming familiar. People have to know what it is. So they say, oh, a fiddle player, or a violinist, or a violist.
And
They
this is
understand, it's
so-
very related, all related.
absolutely, and Gregory, this is so important. We've talked about this a number of times on different shows, but you are a spokesperson for the music, and especially for a generation that may not have a clue about this source. And we grew up, right? Leonard Bernstein, young people's
Right.
concerts on
Right.
TV. You don't have that anymore, and this is
It is
important to
interesting, yeah.
understand because the music that young people are listening to has roots also in
It's interesting
centuries
how
old
quickly,
traditions, huh?
on the front porch of many old farmhouses and houses in general in America, people probably didn't have radios or TVs. I mean, just a few years ago, not that many years ago, and they would sit out there, sometimes the whole family, picking on banjos or guitars or mandolins or fiddles, or and they would all learn different instruments. Sometimes they learned 2 or 3 instruments, and some began singing harmony. But there was a closeness to the instruments themselves and to learning music. Then in schools, they played music. There was sometimes, of course, music programs in the schools, etc. But so few years later, all of a sudden, there's no music program in the schools, and instruments are being seen on television, on mass media, and computers, and all kinds of things. But you don't have an access to live music somewhere.
And the music itself hasn't become as vibrant, as colorful as, if you want, soulful. And gosh, I mean, you listen to Beethoven's symphony, it's 30, 40, 45 minutes, and
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
got time for
That's
that?
right. That's
But-
a good point, time.
And why should we spend the time? What does that do to enrich our souls?
Well,
our
that's a great
minds, and
question.
so on?
It's a very nice question. Because it does, again, envelop many different levels of our existence. Going to a place with maybe 500 people in the audience, 200 people in the audience, it shows the community that we all like this music. We're all coming to experience something special. Then the musicians have been training for years and years and years, are now playing at their best for that audience that they respect. And they're choosing music, they're choosing certain things to play for that audience, and they're learning their instruments. And there's an economy there also. There are tickets being sold, instruments being bought, teachers being employed to teach the people to play those instruments. And so it's a tacit agreement that we're all part of a civilized society enjoying entertainment on stage. And when you're suddenly in the middle of the Beethoven symphony, you're in the middle of an early 19th century work, 1820s, 1830s, when you're hearing Mozart. You're back into the 17th century, 18th century. You're watching a violin made by Stradivarius, who lived in the 1600s, up to 17 something, early 18th century. In other words, you're experiencing something that you can't just experience every day by turning on your TV set.
Exactly, and also, historically, what was going on then?
Exactly.
You know.
By the way, that's a very big point too, because during
Historically,
earthquakes,
politically, yeah.
during plagues, during wars,
Right.
some of these people were building instruments, and some were just practicing their violin, So, I mean, there was, again, a choice to participate in some of the destruction and terrible things, and others, and there were famous even violin makers that literally part of their family was dying because of a plague, or they were dying in wars, and some did die in the war. Certain famous performers died in wars, etc., as civilians or as militants, participants in the military.
And not only that, the music was often pretty much determined by the patrons.
Yes, also. Well, that's a big deal. That's another subject, sure. That's very important.
And so how does that play with the king, the queen, the priests, the ministers, and so on? But so in our relatively speaking, more secular society. How does that play out today?
Again, a fascinating question because, in your understanding, because it's a sensitive question too, because, and I live it almost every day because it's a very funny thing. And there are many, again, stratospheres of that, of how to approach the answer of that question. Because, for instance, some composers and artists, painters, were broke. So there's an economic problem there, and something very important is a priority. So first of all, they have to make a living. They have to buy paints and canvases, and they have to live in a hotel somewhere or an apartment house or a house. And if they don't have that, they're not functioning, and they might even go crazy or, you know, become dysfunctional.
Cut off their ear.
So some may have cut off ears, I don't know.
Right.
But then basically, you know, when one has, let's say, support, so they have a place to live. Maybe it's a barn, maybe it's a house. They don't have to pay rent. Okay, great. That gives them a whole different life. Then if someone actually buys them canvases or makes an art gallery or gives them a theater, they can perform their music or write their plays. All of a sudden, this person has a life, a legitimacy. And then 5, 10, 20, 30 years later, that artist, that composer, that's the poet, whatever, I mean, the writer, the playwright, has had some shows, some exhibitions, some audience playback, some feedback, and suddenly they're making progress. And they don't even like what they wrote earlier, but they're making progress. They have
Progress is making. Big question. Who decides who gets to be seen or heard?
Well, some people would say God. Others would say fate, destiny, luck, or your personality. There's
The
many.
market or what sells?
Well, even how we met was fate. We met in New York City. There are examples of people that were lucky just to turn right or turn left and run into somebody, or even have a problem and to meet someone during the mutual desire to take care of that problem. I mean, if there's a lost dog and you're trying to find this lost dog with a friend, and with a person you met, and you become friends, it turns out the person's a TV producer or a writer, or like you're teaching in the John Jay School of Law. You're a professor. I mean, it turns out we have something in common in regard to humanitarian causes, etc. We become lifelong friends. But we
And
met.
to be noted for our audience too, that your father was a quite renowned conductor from Europe who came here, Dallas Symphony, right?
That's correct. Well,
So-
you further make the point again. So you say, who makes those decisions? Well, what about what family you're born into? Who is your mother and father? That is a very important part of your question. That how does one have that break? And some people were fortunate. And on the other hand, some people who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, as they say, they might have been spoiled, kind of lazy people that didn't really have to do anything one way or the other. They had a great life, which is wonderful. God bless them. On the other hand, if there's some people that are born into poverty or some very difficult times, and they might have had difficulty or lost a mother or a father or didn't have one, they might have produced more to get attention or just to make money. So there are different motivations, yeah.
But also musicians who can cross boundaries are fascinating, which you do.
Yeah.
And I wonder in the classical musical world, I mean, Bernstein, Copland, Gershwin, you know, the
Well, that's
whole
a very
down,
good
right?
point. Well, yeah, that's
They
interesting.
they listen to a lot of different music and incorporated all kinds of things into their own original work.
Well,
Sort of like what you do,
that's
too.
true. You're making a very good point. It's also interesting how some classical musicians stick with classical music their entire life.
Right.
And some jazz musicians will play only jazz their whole life. And if you do think about it, it's kind of fascinating. It's like a different language. And I know some musicians who play great music, jazz pianists can play by ear and really extremely gifted, even more so than your average classical player. But in this one case I'm thinking of, he doesn't read music much at all, doesn't really read.
Who are you referring to?
Should I tell him his name?
Yeah, why not?
Well, he plays the piano like Art Tatum. He's a great pianist, and he doesn't really, at the moment, he's young. He's 21, maybe
Oh, okay.
21. So he's got years to learn the notation stuff.
Right.
His name is Kai, Kai. Kai Mandelbaum. His mother's Japanese, and he's been playing jazz a good part of his young life, and yet he doesn't read music fluently. However, somebody else I work with who I know plays the piano very well, can read anything,
Right.
but the minute you take the music away,
He's
can't
lost.
play a note. Don't ask me what her name is. Oops, I said her. But anyway, she can read anything quite well, reads all kinds of music, but without the music, it's like her ear is not attached to the key we're in or what, she couldn't finish the phrase musically, so to speak.
So we have the instruments and we're only got a couple more minutes, but we're gonna do a part two, which you're gonna be playing more of
A
your
little bit,
original.
my own stuff, a little bit,
Your
sure.
own stuff. So we have the instruments,
Yes.
we have the patrons, we have the,
Patrons, did you say? Well,
well,
we do
where
theoretically.
you're looking, yes,
Oh.
but I'm talking about historically, those who got to be heard were those who were pleasing.
Or the church
The
did
church,
bring a lot of music
right.
out, the beautiful inspirational
Exactly.
Messiah, Handel and Mozart, Bach. They, in a sense, also wrote for their religious beliefs, for the church itself, and they were patronized by the church, in a sense. Probably gave them certain funding and housing and reasons to have, every Sunday at least, a special musical offering. So,
Right.
that's, in a sense, a patron, the church.
And that spoke to people's deepest needs, as you were saying, because these are narratives, these are emotions that you're drawing people into, and they're deeply felt and they really mean something.
Hopefully a common vocabulary. And people show up
Yes.
in church or outside to hear an exciting concert. If they wanted to hear heavy rock and roll music with an incredible guitarist, they'd go see Jimi Hendrix. And if they
Well,
wanted to hear something more melodious, they
couldn't
might
do that
hear a
now,
violist.
but-
Well, they can't do it now because
No, but
Jimmy's
they
not-
did, and it became.
But that's an example.
The
Good
church
point.
became, if you will, Woodstock.
It's true, the Woodstock
was-
of it,
became
in that sense.
Woodstock
It provided that for the people, yes.
But again, just closing up the first segment, Monday, May 26th, 2 p.m., Southampton Cultural Center, which is a 25-pound lane, pond lane.
25
Pond
Pond Lane.
Not pawn, not but pound.
I thought you were talking about 25 pounds, like money.
Yeah,
What does
no.
it cost to get in? Does it say how much? 26 bucks?
It could be,
23 bucks?
doesn't say it,
I think it's
but,
$23 to get in.
yeah, 23, some odd. But we're gonna talk more.
And you're gonna be there.
I will be there.
Maybe I'll get
absolutely.
you on stage somehow.
Well,
That would be
that's,
fun,
I
yeah.
don't know about that, but right now, we're gonna say goodbye for a short period of time. We're gonna now go into our halftime in the sense, and we'll be right back with the second part of our show with Maestro Gregory Singer.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.